So I'd like to welcome Nisha Moody to the show. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Luis. I'm so humbled and excited to be in conversation with you.
So am I. You know, what made me reach out to Nisha was this gorgeous post that she put up actually after, um, I think what you listened to the podcast, right? With me and Minachi, is that right?
Yeah.
So I'm just getting it right now. I just had it here, but then I lost it. But it's essentially, as I'm finding it, it's just incredible. I mean, it's, to me, it's beyond a post. It's like a practice, right? um
Mm.
but you wrote it so beautifully, and it's all about this practice of noticing the joy alongside the pain. Is that how you felt when you wrote it?
Yeah, that's how I felt when I wrote it. And as a result of listening to how Minachi described joy not bypassing pain or not
Mm,
bypassing other things that happen in our life. And I also had talked about how also in the context of like resilience,
mhm.
kind of reframing joy or reframing resilience actually with joy in a way. So yeah.
Mm. I love that. So I'm going to read what Nisha written right here. We go. Okay. So first you quote Minachi, and it says, here Minachi talks about joy being a very expansive experience that can hold all emotions. I think of joy as like a sense of bliss that doesn't bypass life. It allows for all experiences. And then you wrote, this description of joy blew me away. After listening to this episode, the first thought I had was maybe we can reframe resilience and connect it with joy. Last year, I wrote an essay about how we can't talk about resilience without talking about trauma. So often, the narrative of resilience mirrors that of defying all odds and winning at life, inadvertently shaming those who can't meet those expectations. Parentheses, I agree. This completely dismisses those who, often due to systemic oppression and violence, don't fit that winning mold. And this is why I am even more enamored with joy. Joy doesn't ask you to win, it asks you to remember. Mm. It says things were hard and things were beautiful, sometimes at the same time. I don't want to block out the times I wished my dad offered me more emotion, or the 8 years I was partnered with my ex husband, because these experiences gave me so much. I cultivated friendships, musical tastes, memorable evenings, emotional intelligence, and silent understandings that live in my heart forever. The fact is, if you look closely, joy is usually part of the story. Now I understand how to access this joy. Now I understand how to access this joy. Now I understand how access to this joy holds compassion for the people who didn't give me what I needed. To me, this joy is whole and nuanced and complex and painful, just like life. Woo! So that is so powerful. In reading it, I feel it all over again. And why don't we just kind of sit in that and tell me where that takes you now? It's been a while since you wrote it, but
Yeah. Thank you so much for reading that. I had like tingles in my body. Mm, um, it really brings me to process, and how we can have multiple feelings at once. And it's very layered. Like when I was maybe with my father, I mentioned him because he's passed away almost 10 years ago now. And I didn't, in many ways, realize my relationship with him until after he left, years after he died. With my ex-husband, it was an abusive relationship. And yes, I harbored a lot of anger and pain as a result. And on a deeper level, I also see everyone as a teacher, and that brings up so many different types of emotions that are layered. And sometimes those emotions come up later, right? So it's like knowing that I don't know what emotions are there, or like the timing of them, I think is really interesting. So yeah, to me, it brings up so much about process and about how in so many ways we might think, in the first year or two after my father died, I I mean, of course, I was sad and I was grieving him, but I often talk about how in the past couple of years, I have there's so much more emotion that has come up, you know? So it's like you don't know until you know. And I think that's what's really coming up for me, and how beautiful the unexpected can be on that level. And that is what joy is to me, as well.
What I appreciate so much about how you reflect this experience and how you wrote about it and how we're speaking about it is often when I'm in my course with people, or a group, and teaching these practices as well, some people will say something like, but if I attune to my joy, isn't that bypassing? And I love that you brought up bypassing in Soda Minaji, because it's so important to me. For me, what you said at the end about joy is as complex and includes the pain. It's all part of the same spectrum, essentially, of sensation, because every experience is so like juicy, isn't it? With so many different varying, emotions connected. So what I'm always love to notice, and I'd like to hear how you experience it, is when I look out at the world and I see injustice or violence or pain, or I experience it myself, uh, the bypassing would be pretending it doesn't exist. Whereas the attuning to joy would be, okay, it exists, and so does my joy. And then I'm more resourced. Tell me what that's like for you. What does that mean for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel very similarly. It's that um bypassing is acting like it doesn't exist, or that it doesn't affect me, so it doesn't matter too. I think
Yes.
that's maybe on a subconscious level, right? Or it can be on a conscious level too. That to me reminds me just of like kind of this bootstraps individualism mentality, often reinforced by white supremacy. And so there's that. And so to me, there's like a collective component to it. I think, I think that's what comes up in terms of collective, as all of us as a large global community, whether it's collective within our family structure, whatever that may be, and collective within our body. I was actually listening to your what today, it was your latest episode about body sovereignty and seeing it as another being. And I thought about how, like, even that as a collective, our mind, our body, like us, like just looking at things on that more holistic level, right? Holistic navigation. So yeah, I think that that's really kind of what comes up for me with that. And I also want to add, when you said juicy, I loved that, because the first thing that came up to me when I thought of juicy was a lemon. And how when you heat a lemon in the microwave, like my mom will say, like, put it in the microwave for 10 seconds, more juice will come out. So how are we also nurturing ourselves, or shifting the way we move through the world, so that like different juices come out, I guess,
Oh yeah.
So I had to like bring up that metaphor, because I'm like, oh yeah, like we can do different things. Like I can just keep the lemon in the fridge and like let it dry out, or I can try to warm it up. So where does choice come into all of this as well? So that's kind of, when you said all that, what came up.
Okay, now this conversation is getting juicy, because now I'm
What?
thinking, I love the lemon example, because so when you were talking about bypassing as not even by denying, right? I think I was speaking more toward denial, but bypassing as I'm not feeling it, like it doesn't affect me.
Mhm.
So one of my friends and colleagues, Amber McSeal, who's been on my podcast, we did an event last night with my membership about decolonization. And one of the things that she was saying was our feelings have become very colonized, right? Just like when you were talking about the winning mentality, there's
Mhm.
these winning emotions as well. And then there's these like weak emotions. And so this kind of forms from when you said white supremacy, which is a branch of, colonization and colonialism. This place that we've been bathed in, many of us in this. Where do you live? Are you in America?
Yes, I'm in Los Angeles.
Okay, I figured like in American culture, we've been bathed in such a post-colonial context where these emotions, like if we think of the warm lemon and all of its nuance and juiciness, so many of those have been overcoupled with like shame and weakness and straight up danger and threat, depending on what kind of body you live in, and what kind of family system maybe you come from, or cultural system. And so I find it interesting when we think about the act of decolonizing our own bodies, which is very different than decolonizing land. When we decolonize our bodies and we start to notice, oh, all that cultured conditional shame around feeling nuance, when I go into that, it's like that warm lemon. But when I'm bypassing, it's that cold lemon. All those juices are just being stored and shoved down. And that's where trauma comes in. So I'm throwing a lot out, but it's coming up in me as you're speaking. So I'm curious what you're hearing and where that goes.
Oh gosh, I love it. Yeah, like, yeah, I mean, I love like any analogy that relates to like food or gardening or any of that. I think it makes sense, right? Like that's like a microcosm of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like bypassing kind of tells us we don't need the lemon. Like it doesn't serve a purpose. It's there and I'm here. As opposed to what can its use be, and then what can I do with it? I don't know, in a way, it's like creation too, right? Because I could just take it out and leave it on the counter, right? And another thing I do is I put it down my garbage disposal to clean it out. I could do that. So yeah, I think I liked how you said like getting into it is like the juiciness and the nuance. I really loved that because it is in that nuance of holding things that might be oppositional but can completely coexist that I think that's where healing is. To me, a healing is so much of a return to yourself. It's actually not like covering anything up. It's actually going in and like getting to know yourself. It's a becoming and an unbecoming at the same time. And I don't see these things as binaries, just as I don't see pain and joy as binaries. And binary thinking, there's those characteristics of white supremacy, thinking that binary thinking is one of them. So one actually another metaphor, I love metaphors and frameworks, I think about is how, when we look at like pain and joy or something that's like on a binary gender or whatever, I think of it instead of looking at it in terms of being linear on that binary is I think about a sphere. And how, well, first of all, we are on a sphere on this earth, right? Literally. And figuratively, like, where are we on this sphere in our own experience? And how are we knowing others in that way in our own experience? And how does me thinking about, these feelings that I'm experiencing, for example, I have a very good friend whose father just passed away a couple weeks ago. And here I am 10 years out from my father passing away, and my experience of grief with him now affects the relationship I have with my friend, in that I can speak to her about this experience differently because I've gotten into those juices. I was just telling my partner the other day that now I feel like I can talk about my experience of grief about my father differently because now there's like 10 years of an ocean behind me that I can kind of look back at. And so yeah, it's like, how is that like almost like the marinating of that happening, and how can I look back? Because I could have spent the last 10 years not going to therapy, not talking about my grief, avoiding it. I don't know, like just being away from those feelings, or I could sit with it. And there were times I probably did be away from it, and that is also, I think, I want to also bring judgment of feelings into this, right? Like, how am I judging, myself moving into my feelings? How is avoidance of my feelings, so avoidance of my feelings and also rationalization of my feelings, a way of avoidance, right? So yeah, I'm not sure if any of that like was cohesive with what you said, but
Oh,
that's everything
yes.
that came up for me.
As you're speaking, there's like these little fruits of this tree that I'm like plucking from that I want to talk about. I love when you said about judging feelings. If
Mhm.
we everyone listening to this, if we think about somatically what that means, right? That literally means there's a defensive posture against a sensation. So
Mhm.
like a sensation of grief or tenderness or tired or vulnerable or scared, whatever it is. And a part of the body literally is constricting to not feel it. Or like you said, there's like this internal flight response to the mind to figure it out, to think about it, to validate, unvalidate. And by doing that, again, you're removing yourself from feeling the sensation. I find that to be so important because of what you said before, which is the binaries of sensation
Mhm.
and the reality that within our bodies and psyches are so many contradictory beings and feelings and beliefs and desires that don't make sense.
Mhm.
And this inability to sit with the non-binary in us, in my opinion, is where all this prejudice comes from in the external world. I can't be with the part of me that feels strong and weak at the same time. So I have a binary that gets put out and says, you're right if you do this, you're wrong if you do this. And that turns into so many categories of sex, gender identity, religion, skin color, culture. It just goes on and on and on. And
Mhm.
so when you were saying I forget exactly how you said it, something like the parts that oppose can also get along. You said something along those lines. That's the work that lights me up the most because in this earthly experience, we are constantly, especially on the American continent now, we are always sharing space with so many different cultures and peoples and beliefs and opinions. And if we can't even share space in our bodies with our own contradictory feelings, we can't tolerate someone else's, right? And that's really where oppression, for me, that's where it seems like it's rooted from the individual. It's become systemic, but the individual body, it's like it's born from that posture. Tell me what you think about that.
Whew, yeah. I tend to kind of see like the top down and bottom up is like a confluence for sure. It's kind of like chicken and the egg, like where does it start? But I do think what we have like that sovereignty over is our body, right? And what you had said about what something that came up for me was how making it make sense, right? Like making it make sense is our mind, right? So I could think, speaking of judgment, I could think, I'm going to make it make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, like, then what feeling is going to come out of that? Like, I'm going to be annoyed or frustrated. Or I can be like, realize it's all in my body and like, it doesn't make sense and laugh about it.
Oh, yes. I love that.
So how am I bypassing my body by trying to make it make sense, right? So that like just really came up for me. And what was the last thing you said? Sorry. I'm like, that was something that was really prevalent in my mind when you
I
were
want to
talking.
like I want to marinate in that for a moment
Okay, okay, cool.
because I think of the quote from Alok, who's like it's like
Oh yeah.
they're like a non-binary activist, fashion icon, lots of things. But something they said was like, I don't need to understand you to love you,
Mm,
and you don't have to understand me to love me. And every time I say it out loud, I get chills. And it's exactly what you're saying, isn't it? It's like being able to sit in the ambiguity with a sense of curiosity and openness it's so sensational and abstract and so it's beyond even the word ancient to me. It's before language and context and idea and concept. It's just this like nature in us that comes through. And when we get to that place of trying to make sense of it, we literally lose the practice of first building capacity for what's there already. And we create, again, an entire culture of soothing and coping and distracting. And like when I think of dominant culture, again, I really see it through the lens of somatic trauma work,
mhm,
because I see these people who are trying so hard, as you said in your post, to win. And that's such
mhm,
an adrenalized state that's like shocking you out of your sensational body. You're like disembodied in your
mhm,
pursuit of happiness. So I just find it, what you said, really important, that piece of what if we didn't try to make sense of it? What if you
mhm.
just felt it and were with it? And that's what I said at the end that you asked me to repeat. I see every kind of binary in our external world. And that, to me, binary eventually turns into prejudice. I don't know how it can, if you think one's right, one's wrong. But every like external binary comes from, for me, the inability to individually and collectively hold the ambiguity of ourselves, right? Because then someone mirrors a part of ourselves we haven't been able to hold yet, and then we hate them for it.
Okay, yeah, totally. And so one of my teachers is James Olivia True-Hillman, who I know you've had them on your podcast
Oh, wonderful.
a couple times.
I love
So
James Olivia.
yeah, James Olivia is amazing. And it just makes me think, I'm in one of their programs now in Regard, and it makes me think about being with someone and relating to them, um, and how that's also about being with ourselves, and yes, completely. I feel like I can now sit with my mother, who's one of my greatest teachers on many levels, and
Oh yeah.
much more than I used to. But also, there's times where I need certain space and boundaries, and um, I think it's like, I don't have to understand you, but I can try to know you. And I think that's something that kind of reminds me of what James Olivia talks about a lot. Like, I want to know you and understand you, because you have all this juiciness in you that I don't know. And maybe you don't know. And like, let's explore it together. And also, how have the conditions of the world maybe made you a threat to me, or me a threat to you? And not just how can we be with each other? First of all, can we? Because one thing James Olivia taught me also is that I don't have to relate to everybody. I can make that choice. And that choice is powerful. And that doesn't mean in 2 weeks, I might want to relate to you and might want to know you, but maybe now I can't, and I'm one person, and that's okay. But yeah, and that also is connected to something I've been thinking a lot about lately, is what other people awaken within us. I was just on a family vacation with my mom and brother for a week, a couple weeks ago, and I was thinking about the things that were frustrating me, and also the things that were happening that used to frustrate me and no longer frustrated me, and seeing how um, my own process of being with the different parts of the ways I feel now are reflected in how I am, what is being awakened within me when they say something that might have formerly been super activating for me. Or maybe they say it 5 times and then I'm all of a sudden activated again, So all of that being like in my own process and in my own, I don't know, evolution of sorts, how that has now shifted my relationship with them, because now what's being awakened within me is different, or has shifted. So yeah, and I think that has to do with, like, because I'm no longer bypassing myself, coming back to that, right? I'm no longer bypassing all the juiciness within me, because I am warming it up and letting all of it kind of come out as much as I can within my capacity. And I think that's also really, really important. Like, I am one person and I am a human being, and I cannot do it all at once. And yeah, so where in this timeline of the sphere has it all kind of, I love just like bringing it all together as
Oh
you
yeah.
where how does that bring me here where I am now, yeah.
2 words you said, and then I want to pivot into your work, and what you offer to the world, because I usually start with that, but we
Yeah.
just like jumped into philosophy and practice, which I so admire you for being able to do with me. Uh, these 2 words you said are my favorite words: relate, capacity. And I love when you were saying, like, I'm allowed to choose if I relate. I don't have to relate to everybody. I'm
Mhm.
allowed to choose, and I might change in a couple weeks. That speaks to capacity, because I love the term capacity, because as like a human physical body, it only has so much capacity for relationship and activation and sensation, and not eating and not sleeping. It has so much capacity. My desires have limitless capacity because they're from the ether. They don't have a physical, wall they hit. So I love this practice, and I'm projecting this onto you. Okay, I have a practice with capacity, which is just bowing to that at all times. And then
Mm.
from there, I decide how I'm able to relate. And when I hear you say, I don't have to understand you, but I want to know you, I really hear that to know relating, like, because the knowing you, the idea of you is something that I create, and it will change, and it might even compress you if I've created an idea, an expectation. And to relate to you is literally relate to what's in front of me. You as you are in front of me, how am I able to relate to that? And if I have warmed up that lemon and I'm like all about those juices and I'm like good with them that day. Like I have capacity for all those juices.
Yeah,
I'm gonna relate to pretty much anyone. And it doesn't mean like I allow anyone to hurt me. That's not relating. It
sure.
just means there's this openness and curiosity of like, oh, what's before me? Because I've already made friends with what's in me. And then when, like you said, when something awakens in me that I haven't made friends with, it's like, whoa, thank you, teacher. And I might never want to see that teacher again, but what
Mhm.
they've awakened in me is mine for life to be with now. um so I mean, that's how I heard what you were saying. Is that similar for you, or is it different?
Oh yeah, no, that is so right on. And I think when we talked about what you said, capacity and then limitless, like I also saw that as like the limits we have in the moment versus the limitless desires we can always have. And seeing both of those things together is like a beautiful um um connection in so many ways. So yeah, I mean, yeah, what you said was exactly where I was going with that. And I loved how you brought that all together. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. This has been such a rich, really wonderful conversation. I'm definitely going to want to talk to you again in the future in some
Oh,
capacity.
wonderful.
um I want you to tell us about you. Like, what's your story? What's your short story that you want to tell? Like what's your, how do you move in the world? What do you offer? What should people listening know about you based on what we're talking about?
Sure. I think what people should know about me is that I am a person who I've had so many careers. And I'm someone who, ever since I was young, wondered, what am I going to be when I grow up? That question that kids are always asked. And, one thing I realize now is that I feel like the question that I wasn't asked, or none of us are really asked, is who I want to be. Um, and I try to bring that into the work I do. I'm a feminist healing coach. On a very practical day-to-day level, I work with organizations. I work with individuals and groups doing coaching and facilitating, and just connecting. A connection is one of my values, and I just love connecting, whether it's in a space like this with the two of us, as well as, in the future, connecting with your audience. And just getting to know people and seeing different ways of being. I'm all, like I said, all about these different ways of frameworks and of thinking in terms of these different frameworks. And I also couple curiosity and humility together as one of my values, because I think that being curious offers a space to be humble. So like I said, I call myself a feminist healing coach, and really that to me is someone where I look at supporting people through life through an anti-oppressive lens, keeping in mind that we have so much sovereignty and choice, more than we think, and systems of oppression want to make us think that we don't. So, like, kind of like what I was saying, that top down, bottom up, like, where do we meet ourselves in that space? I'm currently running a group about boundaries for BIPOC, called Boundaries for BIPOC, where I'm taking a look at what boundaries look like, specifically in a space where Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color can hopefully, find some safety to talk about that, whether it's looking at boundaries around whiteness, which is always there, and also within our own personal realms, or within our different circles that we are in community. And I love to do these things as a collective activity because, again, thinking about the winning and supremacy culture in general, I don't want to be that person who, is the expert or like knows everything, because I think we all are experts on ourselves, so yeah, that's what I put out into the world. I talk to organizations about being trauma informed, showing up, collective care, which all of this is just very rooted in my values, a few of which I've mentioned already. So yeah, I mean, I've worked as a speech language pathologist. I've worked as a librarian, as a consultant. I also, a lot of my own healing journey actually started with writing and memoir writing. So I've wrote several essays that all started with the death of my father and my divorce were within a year of each other, so it was really losing these two very prominent male figures in my life. And that just like really catapulted this awakening for me, that that was the beginning of my own healing process. And, I think healing is a word that I myself, think about and contend with, because I also like to talk about how there's nothing to be fixed. We aren't broken, you know? And that's kind of where I come to the point that healing to me is, I reframe it as a returning back to ourselves. You know, really like, who are we? And I think the last thing I'll say is there's this podcast called Hurry Slowly. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. I'm forgetting the host's name, but she has an episode where she talks about who are you without the doing. And that brings me back to, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, outside of our actions, like, who are we? Because I could say I'm a feminist healing coach, I was a writer, blah, blah, blah. I was a speech therapist. But one thing I realized, even though I've had all of these trajectories in life, the one thing I kept bringing to all of this stuff was me, my way of being in this world rather than the doing. So yeah, I think I'll close out on that in terms of how I move through the world, and how I be in this world, how I am in this world. So yeah.
I mean, you just awakened like 10 new things I want to talk about with you. So I'm not going to do that right now, but I really want to. I'm so happy that I got to connect with you and just get to feel a little bit of your spirit. It's so beautiful. And like when you're talking about you to bring yourself to all these, your values come to whatever it is you're doing, it's really just your values, and it's you connecting and relating to these people and organizations. It's really clear, there's certain people that you meet who do this work and you really feel like it's their personal culture and practice. It's not just like work they teach, it's like how they live. And I really get that from you, and it's so settling and just such a relief. So thank you for you, and thank you for your work. And anyone that, I don't even know your full story, but anyone that goes through any kind of pain, or oppression or trauma and emerges with like a bigger heart is always my hero. So
Mhm.
I thank you for being that person connecting
Wow.
here.
Wow, I'm taking that in. Thank you so much, Luis. And I am so appreciative to be in this space with you, and to evoke more of the juiciness that is in that lemon.
Let's microwave those lemons. Let's go do it right now.
We'll never look at lemons the same. I
I
mean,
will
really.
never look at a lemon the same again, I promise you.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that we have that lemon connection. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and yeah, for connecting. So grateful.
Okay, my friend, I'll look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.